I think we're going to try to get started here in just a moment. Let everybody find a seat if you can. Hopefully everybody can see the screen. Anybody not? All right. My name is Aaron Clausen. I'm the city's principal planner. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us tonight on a frigid evening to learn a little bit about the Essex Street project. This is an exciting project that we're in very early stages and are really excited to tell you a little bit more about it and a lot of the engagement that's going to be coming along in the near future. We are, obviously I'm speaking in English, but we have live Spanish interpretation. If anybody needs that amenity, could you just let me know? We can get you any equipment. Everybody else is good? All right. Thank you. Just for some quick introductions, I want to acknowledge we've got Councilor Starberg here and Councilor Ellen Sugg joining us tonight from the city, and Commissioner Andy Hall of the Public Works Department. And then we also have a team from Ty & Bond who has been contracted with the city to help with the design and engineering of this roadway reconstruction project. And they're going to give you a lot of the nuts and bolts and details about what we're about ready to do for the street. Before I do that, you guys go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Rich Benevento. Senior Vice President at Ty & Bond. Some of you may have seen me before. My company was acquired by Ty & Bond last year. It was World Tech Engineering. One other little tidbit about me, I was born and raised in the city of Lynn, so I know the city very well. Went to St. Mary's for 12 years, grammar school and high school. So, yeah, a local guy. Bill?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Mercer, Vice President for World Tech Engineering. Working with
He said World Tech.
Oh, did I say World Tech? That's a nod to Rich. Ty & Bond, glad to be with you here tonight and explain a little bit about the project. So glad to be with you.
I'm Alan Kluter. I'm a traffic engineer with Ty & Bond.
Great, thank you. We can go on to the next. We have a fairly straightforward agenda for you tonight. First, we just want to give you a brief overview of the project, the geographic scope, some details about what we're trying to achieve with this reconstruction project, identify some of the needs. I imagine many of you are fully aware of the needs, but we'll just talk through that and how we propose to address those under the goals and objectives of this project, but also some of the goals and objectives of the reconstruction project beyond transportation improvements and traffic enhancements to the roadway. And then we're going to talk about the design process, what goes into that, and because funding is provided through the Federal Department of Transportation and also Massachusetts Department of Transportation, there's a very defined process, and we'd like to go through that with you just so you kind of understand where we're at now and how we're going to get to a construction project in the future. And then work with you on sort of next steps. There's going to be a number of opportunities to engage with us in the city on the design and engineering as we go from concept to construction and beyond. And then lastly, we do want to give some opportunity to have a conversation, so if you have questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end and provide you with information to stay informed throughout this project. Okay.
All right, I guess I'm on. Excellent, thank you. One of the things I think that's important to recognize tonight is that we're on a fact-finding mission. There's nothing that we haven't got into the design very deeply yet. We're here tonight, as Aaron mentioned, the purpose and need. You folks live there. You either live there or you have a business there or whatever it is, and we want to make sure that we're creating a project that meets the community need, that's tailored to what all of you would like to see in the corridor. Now, having said that, there are certain criteria, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But certainly, this is a community project. The nice thing about a project like this, that it becomes a city design in concurrence with Mass DOT, but it's a city design, and so we want to make sure it's tailored to the way the city would like to see it. So a little bit about the project, Project Locust. So where is the project? All right. The project starts at Rockaway and Joyce Street. That's the beginning.
A little slower.
A little slower? Okay. All right. The project starts at Rockaway and Joyce. You may recall, and we worked with Councilor Starboard and others when we were going through the funding request for this project. This project started out with trying to address 4 high crash intersections on Essex Street. When we met with Mass DOT, they said you should consider doing the entire corridor. So this was a tremendous bonus for the city to actually be able to not just do the intersections, but to do the whole roadway. So again, we start at Rockaway and Joyce Street, and then we extend down to Chestnut, right where we are right here. It extends around Chestnut, Fayette, Mason. That whole intersection extends further down to Union Street. So the project extends down to Union Street. But then we continue again to the northeast, and the project goes all the way to Eastern Avenue. So it's a pretty significant project, from Rockaway, Joyce, all the way to Eastern Avenue, and then of course, right in the middle, right where we are right here in this area of Chestnut, Mason, Fayette, Union. Bill, want to go to the next slide? So again, you can see on this map a little bit clearer as to where the project extends. You can also see where those high crash intersections were. Rockaway and Joyce, Chestnut, Chatham, and then of course Eastern Ave. And so all of those intersections would be improved. Projects like this, obviously it's important to address safety first. Safety is always first. And then we're going to talk about some other things. So purpose and need, you see that first bullet right there, safety improvements. On any project, safety is always paramount. So this project will address safety issues, particularly at those intersections that we talked about, but also pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, and other deficiencies along the roadway. Intersection and corridor operational deficiencies. A lot of these intersections don't operate. We know that if we're sitting there in traffic. Why am I sitting in this long queue of traffic? So the project will address those things as well, with all new equipment and geometry and state-of-the-art traffic signals. Just met someone from ISD tonight who is going to be very interested in that. General roadway and sidewalk deterioration. How many think the sidewalks are really good out there? Yeah, nobody, right? Same thing with the roadway. So new concrete sidewalks, granite curbing, all of those things are features of the project. And of course, when you're addressing roadway and sidewalks, you have to think about drainage. Okay, so how is the drainage working? So we have to address drainage deficiencies, new catch basins, new drain lines, things of that nature. And then of course, ADA compliance. We want to make sure that all users can use the sidewalks and the roadway in a safe manner. So the project will include handicap accessibility ramps and things of that nature. And then also this bus route along Essex Street. So it's also enhancements for transit, whether they're new bus stops or transit signal priority, things like that to allow the transit to work better along the roadway. With these projects, a lot of it is really complete streets. And what is complete streets? Complete streets is accommodating all users, right? So that's what complete streets is all about. And the city of Lynn has an adopted complete streets policy. And so to the extent we can accommodate all those users to the most practical way we can, we will do that. One graphic I do want to show right here, you see these bubbles. Mass DOT collects all kind of accident data, and these intersections, they call them HSIP locations, Highway Safety Improvement Program locations, meaning that these are all high crash clusters. They're either pedestrian crash clusters, vehicle crash clusters, or bicycle crash clusters. And you can see that pretty much the entire corridor is in an HSIP location, right? It's a high crash area. Bill, next one. Are you going here?
Just with me.
Yeah, go for it.
So, Thanks, Chris. So just to expand upon what Richard said, there's a number of deficiencies throughout the corridor that we're looking to address throughout this project. Richard mentioned lack of ADA compliant ramps. That was, and I'll show you some examples in a minute. Wheelchair ramps, crossings, slopes on sidewalks, making it accessible for all users. That's what we're looking to address in this project. Outdated pedestrian and signal equipment. From the signal equipment is whether it be traffic operations, making it more efficient for traffic operations, or will it be pedestrian crossings at the crosswalks, pedestrian countdown timers, for example, the walk, no walk signals, making to that equipment upgrade in this project. Pavement markings that are non-compliant or non-standard. Pavement markings are helpful in demarcating traffic zones, whether it be travel lane, shoulders, turning lanes that have been faded over the years. That's what we're looking to upgrade. Lack of turning lanes, we'll talk about in a minute, like traffic operations. If you're looking to take a left, for example.
Just slow down.
Oh yeah, sorry. Looking to take a left, for example, and you're waiting behind somebody to take a left, you're waiting behind them, whether you want to cut around them to the right, or you're looking to proceed. We're looking to upgrade the traffic pavement markings to help demarcate the traffic zones and help efficiency in traffic operations. Various utility trenches and pavement deterioration over the years, whether it be sewer upgrades, water upgrades, gas, water main replacements. The pavement condition over those years tends to deteriorate over the years. So we're looking to upgrade that as well. No bicycle accommodations. You may have heard, right now we're looking to, you'll hear complete streets is a main topic in transportation engineering, providing for all users. You see that whether it be bus, transit, pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles, looking to accommodate areas in all users. So that's what we're looking to accommodate in the future. Transit amenities, whether it be bus stops, near side, far side, bus stops you will see, we're going to talk about in a minute, bus shelters, for example. Again, looking to accommodate all users is going to be a theme of this entire project. Minimal curb reveal. The curb reveal is identified as the elevation between the roadway and the sidewalk elevation. Over the years, pavement overlays, that reveal diminishes where there is no real vertical difference between the pavement and the sidewalk. I'll show you examples of that in a minute. And various sidewalk conditions, whether it be slope, sidewalk heaving over the years, and again, that also speaks to non-compliant sidewalk features, so we'll address that in a minute as well. These are some existing conditions. Here you see like outdated signal equipment. There are modern technologies in signal operations which help efficiency with moving traffic, processing traffic, and efficiency. You'll see here this is a long crosswalk, and you'll see that here there's a vertical curb. So if you're in a wheelchair, for example, if you're in a stroller, there's a vertical hindrance in getting onto the sidewalk. So there should be a curb ramp there. So this is an example of a non-compliant crosswalk. And also this is a long crosswalk. We're looking to address the length of the crosswalks from one side of the road to the other. Here, right outside the Ingalls Elementary School, for example, this is a mid-block crossing. We're looking to make those crossings more visible, which is more safety for pedestrians crossing the roadway. Wide driveways, for example, we're looking to consolidate where we can, or widen driveways. Also, you can see an example of the minimal curb reveal, which allows vehicles to essentially mount the curb, cross the vertical granite curb, and really hinder the pedestrians on the sidewalk. So people are crossing on the sidewalk. Here's an example here of a non-compliant ADA crosswalk. Again, vertical curb. Someone in a wheelchair or a stroller cannot mount that curb. And again, it's a long crosswalk, so we're looking to cross those, shorten those crossing distances, reduce that timing. The pedestrian needs to be in the roadway.
Before you carry on, Bill,
Yeah.
if you could go back to that. You just got a lot of information about the existing conditions of the roadway, sort of what we see as deficiencies and challenges that make it both a less safe road to travel if you're driving or walking or whatever. But I'm just curious, is there anything we've missed in this? I mean, we've got certainly pavement conditions in bad shape, sidewalks are in rough shape throughout. Anything else that we're missing here that we need to be keeping in mind as we're working into the design phase of this? We got a comment here.
Perhaps, is lighting being addressed, like street lights, where there's areas of more towards the night, like darkness, or any beautification?
Yeah.
Greenery, trees, anything like that?
Yeah. So just to repeat the question, or I guess comment for everybody here. The question is, does the design process consider street lighting? And then other streetscape elements like street trees? Is that cover your question? So yes, the short answer to that is yes. Is that this is going to be looking at the corridor from the backside of the sidewalk to the other side of the backside of the sidewalk, and considering all of the street furniture that is a part of that. Lighting is certainly a safety component of that. We are limited in the kinds of lighting we might be able to install. For instance, we won't be able to implement historic street lighting, the shorter sort of architectural lighting. That's not a part of this, but we'll look at lighting more generally. Okay. Question back here, yeah?
Just a question on parking. We generally look in the winter with the snow. The parking sometimes on both sides of the street gets very tight, causing more traffic and everything else.
Yeah. Yes, but the question was, are we looking at on-street parking as part of the design consideration? The whole section will be. Councilor Copa.
Thank you. Have you guys identified, you mentioned bus shelters. Have you identified areas where those bus shelters are? Because that Essex is already a small road.
So as the design phase starts, because this is an 800-step process, we're on step 2.
Gotcha.
So as we do that, we will be looking at where these bus shelters should be, whether we are going to consolidate bus stops. That will be a discussion with the MBTA. We'll have to have those discussions with them, which we will be doing. Also, as Bill mentioned, sometimes you want the stop on the far side of the intersection so that when a bus is pulling up, it's not stopping. We got a green light, the bus stop, no one can get through. We want the bus to stop on the other side of the intersection to let people on and off, so that the traffic, things like that.
The reason why I asked, because this is the first time I heard of you mentioning bus shelters. The area alone is very small, so I've seen the preliminary design. So if you're putting a bus shelter, where are you going to put the other requirement, which is a requirement for the...
Exactly right. So one other thing to that, Bill's heard me say this a million times. Oftentimes we're trying to fit 10 pounds in a 1 pound bag, right? There's a lot of stuff that's out there that needs to be accommodated. Part of the engineer's job is to fit all of this stuff as best we can. Obviously there's priorities, certain things have to happen. And then if there's additional room, we try and do other things. But this will also be streetscape. There'll be streetscape improvements here, whether it's trees or trying to find placemaking, things like that. So that at the end of the day, it's not just, we didn't just pave the street. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Any other questions about comments? Oh, I think we had a...
Solo quería decirle que aquí enfrente de la escuela también una luz para peatones cuando crucen.
In front of school, I was also thinking about a light for people to cross.
De esta que está ahí,
Yeah,
porque
in front of that school, light for people.
Yeah. So I think I could maybe answer that a little bit. Yeah, the answer is part of the design process is going to consider the fact that the school is on the street, and we're going to want to find ways to make it more safe for children and their families to either walk to or from school. And we'll be looking at a number of methods to make it a bit safer. Absolutely.
Well, one of the concepts as well right in front of the school. I believe this was when Mayor McGee was in office. When we were going through the funding request part, was to actually have a turnout. So when the buses pull up, they're not stopping in the street, but there's a turnout for them to pull in to safely let the kids off and on the bus. So that's one of the things that we've been looking at in terms of the concepts. So that should help as well.
Are there any preliminary plans for the Fayette Street intersection?
Fayette at,
Essex, by the firehouse?
so there's been.
Because I've heard rumors about a rotary and
Yeah, I mean,
that's a crazy intersection.
Alan was involved with that, and there were some initial thoughts. This is when we just like had the crayons out, and Mass DOT actually requires us to look at various options, whether it's a signalized intersection, a roundabout, and we're going to have to go through this process with them. It's a very rigorous process. Early on, there was some discussion about Fayette, Essex, having a roundabout there, but we also met with the fire department, and we need to recognize that we need to provide them unimpeded access. And there was some concerns that if you had a roundabout there, and then you have a signal at Chestnut Street, and now you have traffic backing up and this and that. So the roundabout concept, I think, Alan, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, before I even get into that, one thing I just want to mention, I got my notebook here, so I'm writing this stuff down. Some of these meetings I do a lot of talking. Today I'm probably going to do not much talking, but a lot of listening and writing. Yeah, so I would definitely say, especially at that intersection, it hasn't been fully decided yet. And as Richard alluded to, there's a process. There's actually used to always be a process, but now it's even much more involved where we're going through intersection control evaluation with MassDOT. We're actually going to be submitting stage 1 Monday. So the roundabout is not off the table there, and it can't be yet because we have to follow this process. So yeah, having 2 signals next to each other is one option. Having the roundabout is still an option. There is obviously concerns because of the fire station, also because of how close it is to the other signal. So that is, again, a process we're working through.
So having said that, right, going through this process, I think it's important to note that the fire department is going to have a big say as to what's going to happen. Folks at Mass DOT, they're checking boxes off. Did they do this? Did they do this? At the end of the day, it's about safety and access. And if the fire department is saying, hey, you know what, we can't live with this, I think it would be safe to say, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean?
They actually do have a box on the form, because they love their forms.
Yeah.
There is a big box about, has this been discussed with the community? Does the community, have input?
Because of all the intersections along the way, that is.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Well, so many of the other ones are so small and constrained,
Right.
you wouldn't even consider a roundabout there anyways. So this is the one where, because it's wide open, it definitely invites a lot of options, I guess.
A question right here, go ahead.
I think a roundabout at that intersection is also going to interfere with the Lynn Police Department, as that's a very busy part of town. I don't think it's ideal to have a roundabout there.
I will tell you, as the designers.
A lot of people don't know how to ride roundabouts. They're not familiar with it, and I just see it's going to be a hazard.
I will tell you, this has just been very, very, very initial discussions.
Yeah, that's
and we discounted it right out of the gate, especially with dealing, after our discussions with the fire department.
Yeah.
As I said, step 2 of an 800-step process, but we recognize also that certain things fit better than in other places.
Yeah.
So.
And what are your plans on diminishing the length of the crosswalks? I mean,
You want to talk about bump outs, Bill?
Yeah, actually, if you'll just hang on for a little bit, we're gonna get to that, a couple more slides.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
still trying to
Yep.
just assess the existing conditions.
Yep.
We'll move on to the design piece of it. And Councilor McLean, Linfield?
Yeah, my question was basically answered because the woman was talking about safety crossing the street. So I was concerned with that, and I was also concerned with the sidewalks being accessible to the road in the street. And I guess we get to that, design process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Councilor Field, you had a quick comment?
So where I
on step 2 of going an 800-step process, what part do we start talking about easements?
We will,
Temporary, long-term.
Step
Yeah.
700.
yeah. If I could,
I hope it's not 700 because we learned from Broadway that if it's at 700, there's going to be.
We have,
Yeah.
with the neighbors.
we have no idea what we're gonna
Close
need.
to 100 to 700.
So, I know you came in a little late, so we talked a little bit about the process, and we'll get into it a little bit more. So hold that thought, and we can dig into how we're gonna progress through this, because it is a very sort of formulaic back and forth with the state in terms of design. We can get into the timing and what stage, what happens a little bit later.
Can we just go back to the buses pulling in front of the school? Would they pull into the school lot? I like that idea. Or is it gonna be an entrance there to the school?
Not an entrance,
Can you
but
just
just like
describe that a little bit
like
more?
just in other words, the curb would kind of turn in.
Just to get them off the road.
Get them off the road.
I mean, that's a great idea. That's perfect, yeah.
Make a quick comment. Just to touch base on, you said about the T-buses. I drove bus for 30 years, 52. Nothing worse than having a bus stop at the end of a block. And especially a diminished length bus stop. The only way I can get into the curb is if I nose into it, sticking the back of the bus out into the roadway, back in traffic, having them. It's ideal, as a bus operator, to have a bus stop at the beginning of a block. That gives me the intersection to curl, and I can get the entire 40-foot bus against the curb, not prohibiting any traffic from slowing down. And then it gives me a nice clean shot to get back out. Some of those bus stops are so short that whether it's at the beginning of the block or at the end of the block, there's no way I'm getting in it. I appreciate that you said that you're going to look into that. And hopefully my former employer will comment.
And they will.
And agree.
And they will.
Oh, they'll be here.
And agree.
I wanted to summarize that briefly for translation. The comment basically is, the bus stops right now, as they're located and as they're designed, the space that's left out for the bus is not efficient, or in some ways it's very problematic for the bus driver to safely operate into a bus stop, both for people on the sidewalk, for vehicles, and can sometimes cause some significant issues from a traffic delay perspective. The response is that's all wrapped into the design response. And the MBTA will have an opportunity to comment on the design as well for those very issues. Yeah.
And it also helps with the boarding and disembarking of just regular people, but wheelchairs. Because if I can't get in, it's just an awful situation.
Yep.
So thank you.
Okay, if we could move on to maybe some of the goals and objectives. And I think we've talked about this quite a bit already, so I'm not going to linger on this too long. We'll throw it up here. But as Rich had indicated, one of the number one, or if not the number one objective here, is to improve safety across the board for all users. Again, that complete street idea, and making sure that we're accommodating all users at all levels of ability. So that's a baseline philosophy that goes into the design process that both the city but also MassDOT will be very much involved with. Rehabilitation of the roadways and sidewalks, just rebuilding them and make them nicer and cleaner. So that's an important, not an insignificant piece of this. We talked a little bit about some of the broader benefits. There's stormwater improvements that can be implemented along with the reconstruction project. We will work with Lynn Water and Sewer to make sure there are any water line upgrades that need to happen in advance of this project. And also working with utilities to also implement upgrades. So there's kind of co-benefits, there's additional benefits that come out of this work. We talked about ADA compliance and making it safer for folks with disabilities. Transit we talked about. And the last one, enhanced streetscape. I know this comment came up a little bit earlier. We're absolutely going to looking at how can we make the street a more aesthetically pleasing space, more pleasing for pedestrians and human beings to move through, and trying to sort of get everything we possibly can want out of a relatively narrow roadway. And that in some ways can also support small businesses along the corridor, making the space out in front of their business a little bit more nicer, a little bit more accommodating and accessible to the community. We're trying to achieve all this stuff with this project. So that's our objective in this as we go forward in the design process. We've talked a lot about this. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to hit, but these are examples of the kinds of improvements we're going to be designing with the community into the project.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So, I mean, just to reinforce what Aaron has said, this is a complete reconstruction of this entire corridor from the back of sidewalk on one side of the project to the back of side on the other side of the project. So there's a number of elements that we're looking to incorporate into the project. Aaron mentioned pavement reconstruction. This is a complete reconstruction of the pavement structure, not just like you may have heard like a mill and overlay. This is a complete reconstruction of the pavement down to the gravel, structural reinforcement, new sidewalks, new curbing, upgrading of all the signal equipment with advanced signal technology, improved bus stop locations and accommodations, pedestrian safety, and enhanced streetscape where we can. So these things shown on the slide are basically like the tools in the toolbox that we're going to look at. We are completely at the concept level at this point, looking to implement what we can, evaluate what we can before we get into the actual design. So things we'll accommodate is bicycle accommodations, for example. You may have heard bike lanes, shared use paths. All these things are on the table for this project. So we're looking to evaluate that as we go through this early concept development phase. Streetscape enhancements. Some examples of what we may accommodate and incorporate into this project. High visibility crosswalks, for example, making the crosswalks more visible, making them more safe. Curb extensions, bringing that curb out into the roadway that will shorten the crossing distances for pedestrians. Streetscape, whether it be lighting, street trees, making it more inviting. Again, all elements that we're looking to incorporate into the design. Rapid flashing beacons, out by the Ingle School, for example, the crosswalk are demarcated, but we may have these rapid flashing beacons which are pedestrian actuated flashing signals that alert drivers that someone is in the crosswalk, other than just a painting on the street, to alert motorists that people are crossing the street, children are crossing the street, make it more visible. Complete street elements, again, a number of things in this slide. The curb extensions where we extend the curb out into the street, shortening the crossing distances, for example. It also demarcates the parking lanes. We can do street lighting, pedestrian bus stops, for example, street trees. Again, all elements that are in the concept design at this point, we're looking to incorporate as we advance the design. Talk about proposed enhancements. Currently, this is our proposed design, working with the city. This is what we call a cross-section. And again, you see accommodation for all users. You will hear complete streets throughout this project. The complete streets is accommodating, again, all users, vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, transit. So we're looking to accommodate what we can within the limited right-of-way. We only have so much space to work with, so we're looking to accommodate what we can within the right-of-way. And it really is, as Rich alluded to, it really is a balance. So currently, our current design, working with the city, is to accommodate all users by working within the right-of-way. We have 10.5-foot travel lanes, that's the vehicle allocation space. We have a 4-foot space on each side that will allow a space for bicyclists. A lot of bicyclists may choose to use the sidewalks or the roadway. Some people may be intimidated by using the roadway. It is a narrow corridor. It is intimidating to use the roadway for bicyclists. So we are looking to provide a space on either side of the roadway for bicyclists if they choose to use the roadway. We also look for parking lanes on either side of the roadway. We recognize that there are residences that utilize the roadway for parking, as well as businesses that utilize the roadway for parking. So we're looking to accommodate that as well.
No, we have a question back here from Councilor McLean.
Yes.
Do you think it's feasible to have the bicycles on the sidewalk, to have like a path for them on the sidewalk rather than on the street?
So this is the proposed cross-section we're looking at right now. we're going to have to evaluate, and see, you see this last bullet, pending Mass DOT approval. Mass DOT is funding the construction for this project, so they're going to have to say, they're going to have to say a lot of say within the design development as well. So this is the current cross-section we're proposing, because it allows for parking on street, okay, for residences and businesses. But they will also ask us to look at on-street bicycle lanes, multi-use, shared use paths off the road. And again, it's a balance we're going to have to look at. So you're So on every project that goes through Mass DOT, and we're working on a number of them, they're asking us to look at on-street dedicated bike lanes, shared use paths, separated bike paths. This is all going to be incorporated in the preliminary design that we're going to look at. So that is going to come up. But, so we are actually going to look at that.
And I think, Bill, if I may, so we mentioned it a little earlier, it's a relatively narrow right-of-way. For us to be able to accommodate a sidewalk that also has a bicycle path next to it, we're likely going to have to remove a parking lane on the street to accommodate that width. Because you're going to need at least 10 feet. We've seen shared use paths where you have a pedestrian path and a bicycle path right next to each other. 10 is actually a little narrow for that to be a safe environment. But there's going to be an alternatives analysis. But I think our goal at this point, the objective, is to submit and design a street section that preserves as much on-street parking as possible. And I think the trade-off here is that we, at this point, unless the perspective changes, if you're going to do a bicycle lane, I think even if it's on the street, you're going to lose parking. And we're trying to preserve as much as we can.
And one of the issues, obviously, is there's a lot of small business, there's a lot of multifamily housing with not a lot of parking. So again, it's that balance that we've been talking about. Where can we accommodate these things while at the same time preserving that parking? People have to have a place to go. They have to be able to park their car somewhere. So we know that it's pretty tight. And as Aaron mentioned, that we have limited right-of-way. Some sections, maybe between Joyce and Chestnut, Essex Street widens out a little bit. But when you get down by Charlie's and the Ingle School right here, that curb comes really, it's right on top of you. So it's really trying to balance all of this. And that's why the engineers it's going to be a challenge to try to figure it all out.
Aaron, and it's Rich. Yeah, I have a question about this proposed width. Is this explicitly being conceptualized just for Essex Street, or will this also be applied to down Joyce, Union Street, the other parts of this corridor that the project extends to?
So the project extends down Chestnut to Union, so it's just that segment from Essex Street to Union Street, so it's just those short segments. So the project really doesn't go up Joyce Street or up Rockaway or any of that, just we say that it's part of the intersection. Do we have to look at those things even though it's only a short segment? Mass DOT will require us to look at those things as well. Yeah.
Did you have a question, Councilor?
No.
Oh, right.
So, like you mentioned Charlie's, for example, which one of those lanes do you drop? You know what I mean, when you get there? You can't even drive by there now with none of this. So, unless you widen it, which is impossible.
Yeah, you can.
So, what gives? Which one gives?
So I think, if I could, this is a very simplified example of what the desired street section is. The street width is variable from Eastern Ave all the way up to Joyce. There are parts where this will be very easy to meet. There are segments where we won't be able to provide everything in the street section, like the area you're talking about. So there may be an area where an on-street parking space may need to be removed because there's just enough space for the travel lanes, the one side of parking, and the sidewalk. So, but part of that design process is going to look at each street segment, each block, and figure out, okay, what can we fit, where can we fit it, and how do we make safe transitions across the entire corridor. And that will be, this is the starting point, this sets a reference point for the entire corridor. As we move into design, those detailed areas are going to have to be worked out. For sure.
In that scenario, I see like, you're not gonna tell a bike that you have to stop and find another way, so it's gonna be two pockets out there. You know what I mean? I just see that being a real issue.
There's going to be a lot of, this is, as we keep mentioning, it's a very tight corridor, so unfortunately we can't make more space. So I think that's why we're here to really listen, because we mentioned left turn lanes. That's great, but you can't necessarily fit where we have parking. So, the improved operations by having left turn lanes, we got parking that are competing, we got the bike accommodations that are competing, and then, even sidewalk width. So kind of that's why we're here. We really want to listen to see what the priority is. That one up there was to try to preserve as much parking as possible. Trying to get that through Mass DOT, because they like wider bike lanes, is going to be really tough. So we're trying to get something that's going to work the best for the people who use the corridor the most. So
the other thing too is this is just an illustration. This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, but just a basic illustration, because we know Essex Street, the width varies. I mean, it's different down by Joyce and Rockaway. It's different by Charlie's out in front of the school, which is why we talked about having that turnout for the buses, right? And then it changes again as you're approaching Eastern Ave. So it's different all over the place. This is just sort of an example of some of the things that we're going to be looking at. Councilor.
With your experience with DOT, how do they kind of go in order for what they favor when it comes to sidewalks, parking, and bus lanes? I'm sorry, bike lanes. Does it start with bike lanes, and sidewalks, and then parking if it's left over? Or what's your...
They want it all, unfortunately.
First of all, sidewalk has to meet ADA. Like that.
Right.
So the sidewalk, there is a certain minimum width that cannot be below that.
Okay.
So that's, I think,
what comes
top.
next, bike lanes or parking?
Oh, I would say having bike accommodations usually is above parking.
So part of that is on Highland Ave in Salem, state-funded project, in the area between, I want to say it's Jefferson Street, kind of where the high school is.
Yep.
If you're coming from from Medical Center towards Lynn, once you get to Jefferson Street, where the high school is, up to about where that footbridge is, okay? The bike lanes aren't independent any longer, they're actually in that right lane. Okay? Why won't they do that? Will they do that in the areas that you see here on Essex Street to accommodate parking? Because they do it in Broadway and Lynn. So Broadway in Lynn from Parkland Ave right through to the Boston Street and Chestnut Street corridor. If you look at the bike lanes, they're actually in the right lane. It's not an independent bike lane. Same in Salem, from that period that I just explained. Would they consider that on something where it's a toss-up between parking or bike lane? Will they allow the bike lane to shift into the lane or not, in your experience?
So I think that's a share lane marking, or share is kind of the abbreviation. So sometimes they're very short segments. So that's definitely not preferred option, because it really isn't much of a bike accommodation. So perhaps in some limited locations, maybe. I mean, especially getting through an intersection, something like that. But that is definitely not their preferred option.
So this is getting there's a couple of slides ahead. So part of our analysis when we do the traffic studies is we need to do a parking inventory and a study to show how much parking is really needed within the corridor to really justify, for example, if the city wants to retain parking, for example, right, in lieu of bicyclists, we need to show that there's a certain amount of parking occupancy that's required in the corridor to really make the argument to say, okay, you know what, we're not going to take parking to make a dedicated bike lane. In that case, we may shift the bike lane in a shared use path or a shared facility, a sharrow, in the roadway, because you know what, the businesses along this corridor really require this parking to be vital. So that's what we're gonna have to go through. It's a challenge, but DOT, and given that the funding is coming from the federal and the state level, we are required to really take a strong look at bicyclists. So it is going to be a challenge as we go through the design process, but it's not we're negating parking just to provide bicyclists. It's going to be making a justification as to why we need to require parking along this corridor for the businesses to be vital. So it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
Maybe worth going to the process. Again, we hit this a little bit already, and Rich probably can describe the funding of this. It's a $10 million project, right? $20 million project, excuse me. It's funded through a combination of state and federal dollars that's programmed at the regional level. We're part of the Boston Metropolitan Organization region. We're part of the Boston Metro region. They have a certain amount of money every year to program for transportation projects across the room. So we've been able to get this onto what's called the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's essentially a 5-year capital plan that identifies the roadway projects that are underway, some transit projects. This project is programmed for 2026. That means construction is likely to start in 2026. For the whole length of it, construction would be multiple years, but it would at least start in 2026. For what it's worth, 80% of the funding is from federal funding, 20% is through the state. The city's committed to this project by funding the design and engineering. We hire the consultant to design the project for the city under those guidelines. And as we've talked about already, there's a very extensive design review process with this, primarily the state. But as we're working through this, we've identified an engagement strategy where we want the community to help us kind of design this as we go along. Obviously tonight, as we've said and you've seen, there's really no design that's gone forward. We're mostly in the fact-finding stage, sort of developing the studies to support and inform that design. But that will be at least an 18-month to 2-year process to do so. If you mind going to the next one.
Want me to go through this one?
Yeah, please. Sure.
So there's several design steps that we go through. You heard me mention that the 800-step process. The preliminary design phase will be the first part of the project. Tonight we're at the public information meeting. There's sort of this kickoff meeting to get everybody acquainted with the project. There'll be extensive traffic studies and analysis, every intersection, corridor, counting cars, counting trucks, counting pedestrians, doing all of that analysis. From that, we will develop a conceptual design. Again, concept, because before we get to the preliminary design phase submission to Mass DOT, we want to have concurrence with the community, at least on the concept, right? Do we like this? Is this working for us, right? And then we would make this 25% design submission to Mass DOT. Now, they call it 25% design. It's really the preliminary design phase. It goes to Mass DOT and the city for review. Now, when it goes to Mass DOT, it's not one person looking at it. It goes into Boston at their headquarters. Their right-of-way section looks at it, the environmental section looks at it, the complete streets section looks at it, the highway design section looks at it, the landscape section looks at it, the traffic section looks at it. You can see where I'm going with this. It goes to everybody, and they all look at it. And if that's not enough, it then goes to Mass DOT's district office in Arlington. And all of those same reviews happen at the district office. So it's a very, very extensive review process that Mass DOT goes through. And sometimes drives us nuts with their comments. We'll get 400 comments back. So you think this might be a tough audience? We'll get 400 comments back from Mass DOT, and they'll ask questions about everything. Okay. The important part of this too, when we say city reviews, during this process, we want to make sure that we're having these community meetings because we want to continue to get your input. There's some things that Mass DOT are very rigid about. We have to follow certain design standards that we can't deviate from because they have to do with safety and things like that. So there's some things that we can't deviate from. Then there's other things that the city has pretty much can design this thing the way they want. And then there's some things in the middle, like we talked about, the bicycle accommodation and that sort of thing. Those things in the middle that we have to negotiate with Mass DOT, right? So, as I said, it's a pretty extensive process. Once we get comments back from Mass DOT, and we've had a couple more informational meetings with the community, we submit it. The biggest milestone is the Mass DOT official design public hearing. And that's a Mass DOT meeting. And they come out, they bring their engineering staff, they bring people from the various departments, they bring a stenographer who takes a verbatim transcript of the proceedings. It's very, very formal. This is a major milestone of the project. Once we get through that, the horizontal and vertical geometry are pretty much set for the project. And that's really what this 25% design is. It's really establishing the horizontal and the vertical geometry. What's the road doing like this? What's the road doing from horizontal standpoint? Once we get through that, then we get into the final design phase. Well, the final design phase is not just a final design phase. There's a 75% design submission. All of those people I told you about, they review it. They're reviewing it at 75% design. We go through that, we get all their comments back, we address the comments, we make another submission, that's the 100% submission. Guess who's looking at it? All those same people again, right? At the 100% submission. Once we get comments back on the 100% submission, then we go to PS&E. It's called Plans, Specs, and Estimates. That's the final submission. But it's not like, here it is, we're ready to build it. It goes to all those folks again, and they look at it again. So you see where I'm going with this. It's an extensive review process, a very extensive review process. Throughout Mass DOT reviews, there's also city reviews. The city will have an opportunity to look at this as we're going through this. The important thing, too, is that we want to make sure that we're presenting these various milestones to the community so that you're being brought up to speed. Now, Council Field had talked about right-of-way. During this process, during the 25% design, we are required to identify affected properties that might need temporary easements and things like that. But that happens during here. It's in a preliminary stage. The final right-of-way really doesn't start happening until we get into the later stages of the design, because then we know exactly what we're going to need. And when we talk about temporary easements, for example, and I know we probably don't want to go too deep with this, but just because it was brought up, we'll mention it. If the contractor is building the sidewalk, right, he's putting in a new sidewalk, and the back of the sidewalk is right on the property line. If that contractor has to step on that person's property to pound the form in to build the sidewalk, Federal Highway requires that we get an easement from that property owner. So we've had projects where we've had, Mount Auburn Street was like 400 easements because Federal Highway requires that. So anyway, so that once we get to the final design phases, we really know what those impacts might be, if at all. Once we get through PS&E, project goes out for advertisement. Mass DOT advertises the project for construction. Once the design done, the city's pretty much, they've done their part. Now it goes to Mass DOT. Mass DOT puts it out to bid. They staff it with their own engineers. They administer the construction. It becomes a Mass DOT project at that point. As Aaron mentioned, it's on the 26th tip. The project could effectively, it's a federal fiscal year, so October 1st of 25 through September 30th of 26 is when the project could be advertised. Mass DOT doesn't like to advertise things in the last quarter, so it's likely the project would be under construction, or at least out to bid and a contractor selected sometime in early 2026. Anything I missed?
No, not really. I just wondered if we could go, I don't know if we have the next screen, Bill. No, let's go back if you could just for a second. I just wanted to highlight the touch points that we're planning into this process to engage with the community and give you a feel of what we're going to be talking about at that stage. So as you see in the area, that's where we're at right now with the red arrow. We're planning to have another public meeting and engagement before the 25% design submission to share these more detailed designs and sort of identify and work through the street blocks that you have concerns about with safety or where the bus stop is, what have you. But it's going to be more of an interactive opportunity to sort of sit down and ask specific questions about the design and offer comments about design that we can take in and build that into what is submitted to the state. We're looking at having both a public meeting and 2 open houses, one during the day and one during the night. So we have some flexibility for those who are able to make a specific time. And we also want to make these presentations an opportunity for comment available on the project webpage. So that's going to be one opportunity to talk about design, and that's going to be a very important stage. I think that an area where a lot of the community is going to want to learn more about the detailed design elements and comment back to the design team in the city. Are we going in the right direction? So just keep that in mind. We're targeting an end of February, early March timeframe for those meetings. We'll have those solidified soon, but just to keep that in mind. Yes, Councilor. Yeah, we mailed this one. We will probably do it again for the next meeting. Yeah, we'll do a mailing. Yes, yeah, yes. Councilor.
Very quickly, Aaron. I'm very concerned about the situations and the residents of the area. What is the timetable with the old Marshall School construction and this one? And how are we going to address making sure that the residents of the area will not be released in the vulnerable situation?
Yeah. Where we're at with this design, it's very difficult to start thinking about project coordination because we're so early. The Broadway project that is getting underway should be wrapped up by the time that starts. Same with the Linfield Street project. So we will have those out of the way for construction on Essex Street. But this is a very long corridor. So there's a lot of conversation to be had about coordination and sort of construction mitigation. That conversation happens much later in the design process, though. Yeah, as far as the middle school, I'm not so sure when that's going to be wrapped up, but you're also talking about the Two Live Communities project as well.
Correct.
There'll need to be coordination with them, because we also don't know where their construction's going to begin. They're still out trying to get funding for that project, so we will make sure that we're coordinating with their work to mitigate.
Yeah, I was
impacts.
looking at their timetables about the same timeline as this one. So
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, yeah. So the comment was that the reconstruction or the redevelopment of the former Marshall Middle School could likely be taking place around the same time this work happens. That redevelopment is out seeking funding. They're at least 2 years out to get their funding in place. So I think the broader point beyond just that project is there's a lot of coordination that will need to happen as we move towards construction. And that, again, that will be a little bit later. So I just wanted to point out real briefly in this first design phase, before we even get to the MassDOT design public hearing that Rich referenced, we'll be having another design meeting in 2 open houses. And I'll show you how to stay up to date with that. Once we get into final design, we also have targeted another public meeting and 2 open houses as we approach the 100% design. And as Rich alluded to, by then, we're going to have a good feeling about the design elements of the corridor. I think that's a phase where we can really get into the conversation around right-of-way and temporary easements. We're going to do the best we can to avoid any permanent easements or fee takings, eminent domain takings. Our goal is to not build that into the process. At the 25% design stage, we will have an idea of where those impacts might be. But as we move down towards the 100% design, we can really engage with the community, and particularly property owners. So that's an important stage to stay abreast on. Then the final engagement is right before the construction begins, to get into more about, that then becomes less about design, less about the right-of-way, and more about construction. How do we sort of deal and mitigate the impacts of construction?
Question right here.
In the areas of the corridor where there's utility poles that are encumbering the sidewalks, is there any expectation that the utility companies would be asked to relocate the utilities to underground? And if so, could they be required to do so, or is it just sort of a pretty please do that?
So generally, And if I had a nickel for every project I've done that said, hey, can we bury the utilities?
Yep.
I'd be a rich man. Burying utilities is not part of this project, but I do want to talk about the utilities in general in a second. One of the problems with burying utilities is, it's an incredibly expensive process. And it's not just because we're putting wires underground. Generally, it's the service connections to all of the businesses and residents. And for example, if someone has a substandard service, a 60 amp service, it's now required that they be upgraded as part of the project. So it's an expensive process. Having said that, at the 25% design submission, every utility provider on Essex Street is notified by Mass DOT that there's a project coming. If you're thinking of doing some upgrades, you need to start thinking about it right now. They are in the roadway as a convenience, meaning if they have to move their stuff, they have to move their stuff, right? The other part of this is Mass DOT provides an incentive to the utility provider. So let's say they need to move the pole. How many years have we watched, there's a project all done and the pole's still out in the gutter line with some barrels around it and everything else is done, we're waiting to move the pole. Mass DOT now provides an incentive to the utility provider that they will pay half of the relocation cost, but they have to meet the schedule. And if they're 30 seconds late, they don't get the money. So it's a process that they recognize that we need to move this stuff, right? We had several utility relocations on many projects, like for example, the pole is right where a handicap ramp's going to be. The pole needs to be moved. So that's all part of this. To answer your, I kind of gave you a long-winded answer.
No, that's good.
Yeah. Anything else?
That's about the design process. I think we could just open it up. We've covered a lot here, but any other, so we're, just to sum up, very early stage for an exciting roadway project coming to your community soon. We've got a number of touch points with you all to talk about design, right-of-way process, what the impacts on your personal property might be, and then construction. We're just getting started. Any questions about that?
Yes, about eminent domain. What's the time frame that you guys will probably decision be start to be disclosed, and then how do the people get informed by that?
Yeah, so the question was about eminent domain and the time frame and the process. What time do we disclose with properties? So as soon as the 25% design, we want to have an idea of what properties might be affected. The detail of that won't be identified at that point because we're still working through what that design could be. If one has a property along Essex Street, if you do, as you get to that design meeting, you'll have a sense of whether or not that conversation will be coming your way. Once we get down towards the 75 to 100% design, that's when we'll get more deep into that conversation. That it really needs to be finalized by the time that the plan specs, the PS&E.
Actually, before, usually between 75 and 100%.
Yes.
That means to stay informed, we were encouraged to attend all the meetings, basically.
Well, yes, I would encourage you to do so because I just think it's a wise idea to stay up to date as much as possible. There is notification if you want to talk a little bit about the formal notification that happens, but I will say the requirements under law means you get notification pretty late. So staying abreast of the project if you have a property on the corridor is the best way to go. And as Councilor McLean mentioned, we'll be sending mailings out to keep the people up to date. I would also encourage you to log into the project page and sign up for the newsletter. We will be sending out email newsletters in advance of every meeting, so you just get it in your email inbox, so you don't have to worry about watching the calendar or what have you, or checking the webpage. That would be the best way to stay.
Well, one other thing I want to mention too, because we used the word eminent domain and we talked about easements and I talked about the contractor stepping on the property, right? The other thing that requires an easement is, let's say for example, they put in a new sidewalk, but now they need to blend between, say, your driveway in the back of sidewalk, so they need to pave your driveway. They need an easement for that. So it's things like that also. Or you have a front lawn and they put in the new sidewalk and they need to regrade your front lawn and loam and seed it. They need an easement for that. So I know a lot of people think of eminent domain, oh gee, they're taking my living room. That's not what a lot of this is, right? It's really that they have to do work that may blend the new work with existing property and that sort of thing. So those are required, the federal highway requires, it's part of the Real Property Act that the easements are in place. A city or town, oftentimes they'll pave a street and build a sidewalk and, you know, they'll just do that. With a project like this, it's very, very regimented, detailed, and has to follow the policies.
And just from a time frame perspective, so this 25% design that Aaron's referring to, that's probably sometime next late spring, summer. And then construction is obviously in 2026, and as Richard mentioned, there's 4 submittals after that. So the first submittal that we're going to officially make is probably next spring and summer, and then the 75% is probably 6 months after that. So this isn't going to happen like in January 1st. There's some.
That's very helpful.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
David, are you in a butter?
Say again?
Are you in a butter to the property? Like, do you have a property alongside?
Right.
You do?
Yeah.
So there will be a temporary easement from you?
Yeah.
Just heads up.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Or permanent.
Yeah, we're more worried about permanent rather than temporary.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sometimes the permanent easements, like for other projects, sometimes it's overhead utility wires. And sometimes they're already there, but they aren't necessarily recorded, and it needs to be recorded. So it's, again, not always, of course, on the property plans, they kind of look scary or whatever, but sometimes it's not really anything that will
Just the wires
impact you,
connected to your house.
but it's making sure, you know, anything that's not just for your house, anything that's kind of going to other people. So sometimes it's minor like that, but it needs to be done correctly.
And it can be scary, you know, some, oh geez, they're going to take an easement.
Yeah, the letters that they send, or that we send are they get people excited unnecessarily sometimes.
You had a question?
Yeah, a question also related to utilities. With regard to illumination, for a couple of multi-part question, is there a standard for illumination that's going to be followed strictly, or is it just sort of a guideline based on what is along the corridor? And I mean, I know from anecdotal evidence that people have a love-hate relationship with streetlights right in front of their house. I'm not saying that I am, but is there any way to sort of anticipate where the street lighting would go so people might know in advance, oh, I'm going to need to buy some new window blinds or something like that? Or, and also...
Who owns a street light? The city of Lynn. The city of Lynn owns.
Okay. So, and also is the element of like the rates of crime along the corridor taken into account? Because where there's a high crime pocket along the street, that might benefit having brighter illumination.
The lighting engineers will look at that and they do a photogrammatic, I'm trying to get the word. They look at, photometric, thank you. They do a photometric plan. It has contours on it so they can see where the light spread is. The other thing too is they'll do, generally you can do lights that have shields on them so it's not shining into somebody's window. Generally new lighting is dark sky compliant, those are other things. So all of that is part of the mix.
That's part of the mix.
It's part of the mix.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah, you have a question.
So on the crosswalks, you were talking about doing the jotting out there, okay?
Where it depends on what fits.
In the wintertime, you know, Lynn is pretty congested and the snowbanks and everything. Do you think, what's gonna happen with all those snowbanks with the jotting out? Because now we're losing part of our street. It's getting smaller, and where does that snow go for the pedestrians to stay in that jot out part to cross that street intersection there?
I don't want to speak for my Public Works colleague because we're part of the American Public Works Association, but most Public Works folks don't like the bump outs, right? Because they're hard to navigate around. However, you know, the snow is an issue. Although I just read that we're never going to get snow here again. I read that. Did everyone else read that this morning? It's never going to snow. Andy's perking up. You just have to make that accommodation. You know, again, it's one of those balance things. Do we want to provide safe crossing and shorter distances for pedestrians? All right, if that is important, which it should be, right, then we figure out what we're going to do with the snow. In some cases, if you have a bump out, it's actually a little bit, there's more space to put the snow in the bump out area, right? Now, does it stay there? Is it removed? Is there paths? I mean, we know what it's like in the wintertime trying to cross a street with snowbank, like a windrow going down the street, you know,
I
so.
find it to be a little bit of a hazard, but how do you plan on this design to stop the crashes at those 4 intersections?
So I think actually there was a road safety audit that was done on the corridor that actually they identified a bunch of potential improvements. So it comes down to, say, for the traffic signals, design traffic signals. Making sure that you have 2 overhead signal heads rather than 1, or post mounted, is safer. Having backplates, especially with the retroreflective backlights, much more effective. People can actually see the signal. So some stuff like that, which sometimes doesn't seem like a big deal, but it can be. Where appropriate, sometimes the left turn pocket might really help cars. Actually, striping lanes rather than kind of having a, well, how wide is the road? You know, is that parking? Is it road? Actually, you know, just keeps people in a much more organized pattern. So there was a bunch of recommendations that were identified. We're going to try to incorporate as much of them as possible.
And then, of course, smart signal technology, right? I mean, signals that allow people to wait the turn, as Alan mentioned, left turn pockets, things like that, so people aren't going around someone else trying to make a left turn. It would simplify the driving function, right? So everybody knows when it's their turn.
Pretty much this entire corridor is a pedestrian cluster. So a lot of, you know, it's been dangerous for pedestrians. So having upgraded countdown pedestrian signals are more effective for pedestrians. That way they know when to cross. The APS signals, where you push the button and they tell you to wait, and then they chirp when it's your time. They were actually originally implemented for people that were blind or had restrictions to sight, but it helps a lot of people just kind of giving that clue, so that they're crossing when they should be, not crossing when they shouldn't be. Basically, it's not one thing, it's going to be a bunch of things.
What we'll do too is on the project page, we will upload documents, and so we'll include the roadway safety audit, so you can kind of, if you want to, go through that, but it helps articulate the number of tools, some of them that Alan just mentioned, that can be brought to bear to make it safer. There's a range that we'll look at.
I think one of the important things tonight too is, I mean, it's a long roadway. We're glad all of you came, but we would hope that more people participate and engage. We also are in the midst of the Weston Ave project. I think we had a meeting, and it goes from Market Square all the way to Easton Ave. You know how long that is? I think 10 people showed up. So spread the word. We want you to be engaged. We want your comments. We want to be able to tailor this to the specific needs of the community and all of you. So that's why it's important to be engaged with this process. It's very, very important. And we know the counselor will. You'll be getting people here next time, right? You know, make sure we get a full house.
We'll make sure of that.
Any other questions?
Just two quick questions,
Okay.
if I could. With all the lighting upgrades and signal upgrades, somebody had just mentioned about a crime area. Are any of these intersections along this corridor, would there be security cameras?
So there'll be video detection for the traffic signals, but not for surveillance.
As part of this project. Police already left, of course, so.
Well, I kind of wanted to, yeah, I looked over my shoulder and they were gone. I wanted to kind of close that. Okay. The second one is, you had mentioned earlier about sidewalk heaving. My experience living in the city over these years is a lot of the sidewalk heaving is due to old trees that are just overgrown.
Yes.
Is this part of, when you do a sidewalk repair, the tree disappears?
Generally, if the
I knew you were gonna do that. We have such an issue with the city, I know. Even on the street that I live, the preference is to leave them in place.
Yeah.
But there's such a traffic hazard.
Yeah, and it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Mature trees have rights, believe it or not, in the state of Massachusetts, so it's not as easy as just cutting them down.
Yeah.
But it's all a compromise.
I know.
It's all a compromise, and
Yeah.
we're gonna do our very best to
And
make
that's generally why the sidewalks.
You know, and the last thing I want is on a $20 million sidewalk job to have my new sidewalk pushed up by trees.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right. Typically, it's a case of the wrong tree being planted years and years ago.
Yeah.
Right, you get Norway maples, right, exactly.
Well, you know, and it's funny you said that because when these trees were planted, they were all planted at the same time. They all got old at the same time, and they're all coming down at the same time.
Right.
And so you go from stretches to where there's, you know, you have some trees that are really decrepit, and then stretches that there's no trees anymore because they were so old that they had to cut down.
So one of the bonuses of this project is that, and you heard me mention, it goes for review at Mass DOT's landscape section.
Sure.
So, you know, there'll be this tug of war with Complete Streets wants a bike lane, and then someone else wants something else, and then the Allen's fighting for space for his traffic signal equipment.
Yeah.
And then the landscape folks come out and they say, oh, you don't have enough trees out here. You need to be putting trees. And, you know, where are you going to put them? And are they going to be in tree pits? And, you know, all that kind of stuff. So if we do have to take trees down, it's not like we're just going to devoid the place of trees and a canopy. We're going to be putting stuff back.
Of course. And I saw that in some of your photos.
Did you have a
question?
Oh, me? No, I'm just very pensive. I did have a question, but not related to what you've been talking about. On the future Touchstone meetings, should we expect any additional representation from Mass DOT that might come to those meetings, or would only that public hearing in the future be the
I would expect just the design public hearing. Otherwise, it's who you see here and other officials from the city. Yep.
What's the length of the project, time-wise, give or take?
What's the time?
Yeah.
All right, so we're starting now, sort of.
But I mean, we're saying 2026.
Yeah, so.
A year, 2 years, 3 years?
You mean construction?
Yes.
Oh, construction, construction on a project like this would be 2 construction seasons, which might be 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? Because let's say they start the project in the spring, they go through 2 seasons, and now we're at the end of the 2nd construction season, but it's November. They're not going to pave in November.
Sure.
They're going to come back in the spring and pave when the weather's more conducive to that. Sure. So it's probably a 3-year construction project. The other thing too is, it'd be one thing if this was out in the middle of nowhere, they'd bang right through it. They have to deal with traffic because they can't close the road, so they have to deal with, you know, bidirectional traffic, closing lanes, you know, from different periods of time. There's utilities going in. There's going to be new drainage. So it's going to be a tough project to build just because there's a lot of traffic. It's very tight and congested. It'd be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be tough. So, but part of our plan, we have to include traffic management plans for traffic management during construction. That's part of the submissions. And then when the project does start, there'll be, as I said, Mass DOT, they'll have a trailer or they'll have an office space. We encourage the communities on our projects to make that connection, be at the pre-construction meeting, because there's going to be certain things that Commissioner Hall's going to say, hey, you know what, this is okay, but we can't live with this, we need to work this out, right? Things like that. So it's all about communication.
Sure.
It's getting late. Any other questions? I don't want to hold anybody much later than we already have. Any other questions? All right. If you haven't signed in, please do so, particularly if you are going to leave your email address. I will email you flyers going forward so that you know that projects are coming along. Otherwise, the webpage is linncommunitytv.com/Essex. In addition to upcoming meetings, we will have project documents, plans, other opportunities to engage, so it's worthwhile to sign up on that webpage.
And mark these dates down, right, Aaron?
Yeah, those are the next coming dates. These are the February 28th to 29th.
Bring a friend that lives on Essex Street.
Will this slide deck be on the Lynn Common?
That's a great question. This slide deck will be on the Lynn Common page tomorrow. That's it.
Thank you all for being here. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.